Hello learners, welcome back to our lectures on the course of Environmental Economics. Carrying forward the concept which we have been discussing about the market failures, wherein we have talked about externalities, we have talked about public goods. We will today talk about a type of a public good which is called as a common property resource. In this particular lecture, we will be talking about and understanding the concept of common property resource. Thereafter, we'll know that what are the types of common property resources, and then a very interesting concept of tragedy of commons is what we will be discussing in this lecture. We have already discussed in detail in the previous lecture as well as in the lecture of market failures the classification of goods by the major attributes. This is just another one small revision before we go forward. That is basically the goods are divided on the basis whether they can be excluded or whether they are arrival. So the four types of goods which we have talked about is private goods. We have talked about public goods, which are the two extreme ends of the continuum. And between these two lie what is called as club goods and common property resource. As you can see, common property resource are those which are non-excludable. That is, you cannot exclude someone from consuming that particular resource, but they are rival. That is, consumption of one has an impact on the consumption of to another person. Unlike a public good, which is both non-excludable and non-rival. So when we talk about these goods, which everyone can consume, but consumption of each person has an impact on the level of available resources to the rest of them. For example, fish stock, timber in the forest, the coal reserves that we have, they're all non-excludable. But consumption of more and more of this leads to depletion in the stock of these goods, hence creating a greater environmental damage or environmental degradation. And to a large extent, environmental resources fall in this category, and hence we have been talking about sustainable development. That is, in the greed for consumption by the present generation, it should not be that we are not leaving anything for the future generations to come. So that the concept of sustainable development particularly has taken shape from this characteristic of non-excludability and the goods being rival. Now, when we talk about common property resources, as we have just said, these goods or services are those which are being shared by a well-defined community. That is a community. For example, when we talk about the forest rights of the tribals, that is tribals living in the forest, near the forest, or their livelihood depends on the forest produce, the community is using those resources, and because why the community is using these resources is because these goods are non-excludable. You cannot say that you cannot use this forest, you cannot use the fish which is in their pond or it is in the sea, because it's everybody's property. So everybody can freely consume or enjoy these resources, but they are rival in consumption. That is, it reduces the availability to the others when one person is consuming. So in a community, let us say in a rural community or in a rural area or within the tribal community, the example of grazing lands for the cattle, the village ponds or the non-timber forest produce, they all are the examples of common property resources by these communities. So this community, maybe their livelihood is dependent on the fishes which are there in the pond or the other non-timber forest produce. So you cannot disallow one person from using these goods So they are non-excludable, but every time someone is using them, it is changing the availability of the resources to the others. Changing in the sense, it is diminishing the resources availability. So when we talk about the characteristics of common property resources, one, as we have just seen, no member of the community can be excluded. Why? Because by the name itself, they are being used by all the members of the community. Second, the resource use is rival or subtractive. That is, every time someone is using, it is diminishing the availability to the others. There is no private ownership, but there is a well-defined exclusive use, joint user rights by the community groups. The village pond does not belong to any one person, but it is very well defined that this village pond belongs to everybody in this village. So that is, it is given in the community groups. There is an element of indivisibility of these common property resources. Indivisibility means you cannot divide it. If you try to divide it, it may reduce the total available, or it may render the resource not of any use to anybody. So that is the element of indivisibility. Let us see certain examples of common property resources. For example, the land resources which are there with the panchayat, the government's revenue lands, or the village common lands, they are all land resources. For example, when we see the community parks or the public parks which are available in the urban areas, they are all common property resources. Forest resources are the protected and unclassified forests. Then water resources, for example, we have just seen the tanks, the village ponds and the lakes, they belong to everyone. For example, when we have a lake in our urban area, everybody can enjoy the benefit which we are getting from the lakes. Then coastal beaches, the beach spaces not only for fishing but also for the non-fishing activities, they're all common property resources. Anybody can go to a beach and enjoy or take the benefit of maybe the use value or the non-use value is available for everyone. Now, once we've understood that what are common property resources, that is, the property is common, you cannot exclude anyone from consumption of that, but it is rival, that is subtractive in nature. The availability diminishes as more and more people start using it. For example, when a beach becomes very crowded, everybody has a lesser space to enjoy in that beach. So, but you cannot exclude someone from going to the beach, right? Because it is a community resource. Now, let us understand the types of common resources the way we have understood the types of the goods. There are basically 4 types we are going to talk about. One is a common property, then we have what is called as open access resources, then we have state property resources, and then we have a private property. Okay, so private property is very similar to what is a private good, which we have talked about in the previous lectures. Now, let us see all of these one by one. What is a common property? It has been classified by Baland and Plateau in 1996 into 2 types. One, which is a regulated common property. As the name indicates, we are saying that there are a set of rules which govern the resource utilization. That is, how much of it is going to be utilized is regulated. It is a common property, but there is certain rules which have been set for the use of this resource. Then there is unregulated common property, that is, there is no rules respect to how much of this is going to be utilized. So, unregulated common property resources are protected only by community membership restriction with no conservation rules existing or enforced. For example, if there is a forest area and the government has kept certain area as a reserve area, it is a core area where no one is allowed to use its forest produce or venture into it for any type of a commercial activity. It is a regulated common property resource. But unregulated common property means that anyone can use that resource without any limit to its utilization. So there are no conservation rules or are enforced or are existing, and it is only through community membership that certain restrictions can be put. Then the second type of good common property resource that we have is called as open access resource. Open access means that they lack exclusive ownership and control on the entry of new users. No one person controls this resource, and how many users can enter, it is also not regulated. Hence, because of this, they are highly prone to overuse and degradation, because you cannot control how, unlike case where the community is deciding that who can use, in open access, anybody can come and use, because there is no exclusive ownership, neither there is any kind of control on the entry of new users. So anyone can come and use this good, hence it leads to its overuse, and because there is overuse, it leads to a degradation. Examples include, for example, overfishing in international waters. So if there is no set rule that who can fish, how much you can fish, overfishing takes place. Or for example, transboundary air pollution, which is a very pertinent issue in case when we discuss the environment, the impact of globalization, or when we talk about global warming, we talk about this transboundary air pollution. So transboundary air pollution is very difficult to regulate. So because of which leads to higher degradation of the environment. The third type of is the state property resource. What are they? They are managed and maintained by the government agencies or the departments, as the name is indicating. That these are the common resources, but they are being governed, they are being managed, they are being maintained by certain government agencies. So therefore, the state enforces both access and conservation rules. That is, who can access, how you can access, how much of it you can access. They are decided by the state. Also, there are certain conservation rules for these resources. For example, we see national parks. Government has set certain rules that how many safaris can be done from a certain gate of that national park, when the national park, which area of the national park is going to be used for the purpose of tourism. So there is certain enforcement which is being done, and certain conservation rules which are set in force by the state. So many times we see in case of minerals, in case of oil, gas, forest, water bodies, that they are owned and managed by the government. Even though if it is under a private land, and if the government comes to know that there is a mineral beneath the ground, the government will take over that land resource and set certain rules for the exploration of that resource. The fourth type is a private property, as the name indicates, that it is giving an exclusive right to any private individual for that resource. Okay, so and these rights are completely secure, transferable, and provide the holder with the right of possession, transfer, use, and change, including the destruction of the asset. So if somebody has been given an exclusive right for that property, then that person has a complete right that who will access, whether I want to sell, whether I want to keep, what do I want to do with it, whether I want to use or change or destroy this asset, it is completely on me. Okay. Now, when we have talked about common property resources, we have seen that these are those resources wherein the goods, you cannot exclude someone from using that, but every new person who comes and starts using that resource, it reduces the availability to the others. Okay, now this graphical representation is I am doing. This is from Kolstad's book, wherein he has talked about that what happens when we have a common property resource, and let us say that there is a village pond wherein there is a sea nearby where fishers want to go for fishing. Okay, now because it is a common, that sea is a common property resource, if you don't regulate it, anybody can enter and start doing fishing. Okay, so two questions we need to answer. One, what will the fishers do when there is no regulation? Second, what should they be efficiently doing? So Charles Kolstad in his book has tried to explain the question of a common property resource by this graphical example. That is, if there is a lake or there is a sea nearby and fishers, there are many fishers, what should they be doing and what they are actually doing? So if there is no regulation, then what is happening, and if what efficiently they should be doing. So this diagram will explain it. We have on the x-axis, it is the total output of fish which can be fished, and this is the total value of the fish. A linear red line is showing the total revenue from fishing. Of course, as your output, you are fishing more, you are getting more revenue because you're going to sell it for the purpose of making money. Whereas if you see this total cost curve, initially it is increasing at a very far, it's increasing like this and then it goes up. It is not a linear line like a total revenue curve. Now what is going to happen here is, every fisher, everybody, I know that sea is open for everybody, so anybody can come and start fishing there. So what actually the fishers will do is that they will try to be at this point E, where their total revenue is becoming equal to the total cost. Okay, so they try to be here because they feel that more we fish, the more revenue we are going to earn. But because after this point P, what is going to happen is that the cost would be more and revenue would be less. As you can see here, what is happening is the cost is more, revenue is less. So fishers, everybody who wants to come, the entry will keep on taking place till this point E, because they feel that we are making total revenue is equal to total cost, even though their net benefit is zero, because what they are earning is what they are spending on fishing of this. So that is the first answer to the first question, that what the fishers are going to do when nobody is regulating that how much is going to be fished. Every person who feels that there is some revenue out of fishing, they will come and start fishing because the total revenue is increasing and the total cost and total revenue become equal at point E. Okay, so this will be the level of output that we see in this case. Okay, but the second question is, what should they be efficiently doing? Even though at E their TR is equal to TC, but if you see that the marginal cost of producing or fishing is increasing faster than the marginal revenue. That is, every new person who's coming in, is for him the extra cost of fishing is more than the extra revenue which he or she is generating. So effectively, they should be producing or they should be fishing at a point where the gap between total revenue and total cost is the greatest. Let us say this portion B. Or in other words, where their marginal revenue becomes equal to the marginal cost. That is, their profit should be getting maximized. What here they are doing is, they are just maximizing their TR is equal to TC. That is, they are just seeing that what is my break-even point. The point where the extra profit may be less, but still they are going there because there is no one regulating and they know that nobody can stop us from fishing. But they doing so, they are not understanding that not only they are depleting the stock of the fish, because every time fishing is, more fishes are added, the availability of fish in the sea is reducing. So they are spending more time, more cost on getting the same amount of catch. Hence, the extra cost of fishing increases as more and more people come to start fishing. Hence, this point E, even though it seems to them that their TR is equal to TC, but their marginal cost is more than their marginal revenue. Whereas at point V, that the gap between TR and TC is the highest, is the point where they are not only conserving the fish that they have, but the extra cost of fishing is equal to the extra revenue they are making. So efficiently they should be at this point Q1, but actually they are at point Q. So because there is nobody going to regulate, they are overfishing overfishing is not only damaging the environment, it is also leading to lesser profit and to the fishers, whereas actually they should be producing at Q1. Okay, from this we get very interesting concept, what we call as a tragedy of the commons. Let us say there is a parable, or let us say there's a folklore which says that common resources get used more than what is socially desirable, is what we have just seen in the previous, just a minute back, that how overfishing is taking place. So more resources are being used than what is socially desirable. So let us say that there is a medieval town where sheep graze on a common land. Okay, so there is a medieval town where everybody is into cattle, into sheep grazing. They are rearing sheep, and all the sheep of that town go and graze in a common land. As the population grows, the number of sheep grows. So when this happens, land is fixed. More and more sheep is grazing on the same land. So the grass will begin to disappear from overgrazing. The private incentive of using the land for free outweigh the social incentive. Okay, you thought that, okay, let me have more sheep. Why? Because it will be my advantage to have more sheep. And grazing is going to be done on a common ground. So my cost of grazing will not be there, even though I will get more benefit from that extra sheep. But as I'm thinking, there are many people who are thinking the same. So everybody would try to have more sheep, and eventually the amount of grass available for grazing will be less. It will maybe disappear, and ultimately what is going to happen is that the private incentive which we saw here in this case had outweighed the social incentives. So eventually what is going to happen is people will no longer raise sheep because there is no grass available to give to the sheep. Okay, now this concept has happened, or this tragedy has happened due to externality. What was the externality? It was allowing one flock of sheep to graze on the commons land. It has reduced its quality for other families. Why? Because when, like I thought that let me have more sheep, person B also thought. So eventually for everybody, because that sheep was, that available land area was common to everybody, eventually nobody got the benefit of that land. So that is what is called as the tragedy of the commons. That is, when you have a common resource and when nobody thinks about that common resource, when everybody thinks about their own private benefit, it leads to the damage to the complete society. So people neglect the external cost, resulting in the overuse of land. So when a resource that is shared without responsibility or accountability, it becomes degraded or depleted. Okay, for example, when each one of us thinks that let me have my own car to travel from my work to my home. So when each of us only think of our having a car because it improves maybe my standard of living, it saves my cost of travel, it gives me greater leisure by traveling my own car. So when everybody thinks starting like that, then that leads to traffic jam and leads to a lot of air pollution, leads to noise pollution. So eventually all of us then suffer because of these externalities, which we never thought that if everybody has 2-3 cars on the roads, each family member is using his or her individual car, and we forget using the public transport, it leads to a greater problem, because we never thought about that what is going to happen to that common resource, because we are just talking about our private benefits. So that is called as the tragedy of commons. So why? Because there is a conflict between the good of the individual and what's good for all. So as individuals, we try to think good, my private individual goods, and we forget that what is good for everybody. So when we forget about the common good, it leads to not only the loss of the society, eventually we make the society that loss comes back to us also. This concept was coined by the biologist Garrett Hardin in 1968, wherein he gave the example of cattle herdsman behavior, similar to the parable which we have just discussed, that if there is a village where people have cattle, and every herdsman believe that let me have one more cattle, so every extra cattle will add +1 to him advantage. And he says that the grazing land is common for the community, so I will not lose anything, or I do not have to pay anything, so my extra cattle will also go and graze in that land. And eventually everybody thinks like that, and the cattle, for the cattle available, the grass keeps on reducing, so eventually none of us can take care of the cattle. So in his words, what is he says, that each man is locked into a system that compels him to increase his herd without a limit. That every person only thinks about his own well-being, and they increase their herd without any limit. In this case, cattle. So they are increasing their herd, they are increasing the number of cattle they have without any limit. But what world we are living in? The world that is limited. So my resources utilization is getting unlimited, but the resources themselves are limited. Hence, the freedom in common brings ruin to all. That is, when we think that the common resources are freely available to everybody, hence we only think about our well-being, forgetting about the well-being of the society, forgetting about what is going to happen in the environment, it actually brings ruin to all of us. That is what we are seeing these days. What people have done, what the communities have done, what the world has done in order to have greater and greater economic development. We have exploited the resources, the natural resources which we had, and eventually this freedom of unrestricted, unbridled use of natural resources is bringing common ruin to all of us. We see the climate change, we see the global warming having an impact on agriculture productivity, having an impact on our healthcare cost. So it is bringing, because it is bringing damage to each one of us. But when we started over-exploiting it, we thought it is for everybody. Anybody can use how much if they want to. So that is called as a tragedy of commons. There are a few examples which we can take from tragedy of commons. What we have already discussed is overfishing beyond the sustainable levels. Second is environmental pollution. We have just discussed that industries, unbridled industrial growth has led to environmental, air and water pollution. It has not only contributed to environmental degradation, but the cost is also with respect to the healthcare cost, which is increasing. Traffic congestion also we have just taken, that is everybody starting there using their own cars, and collectively we are contributing to traffic congestion, increasing travel times for everyone. So these are some of the examples. Let us see a small case of common goods and market failure. All of us have emails account. We have also seen that how much spam emails we receive from the firms when they want to advertise their product. So every firm thinks, let me send emails in bulk to the people for my business promotion. Now, spam is not excludable. Why? Because firms cannot be prevented from spamming. If your email ID is available, anybody can send you mail any number of times. But even though spam is not excludable, but it is rival, because as in more company use spam, it becomes less effective, because we know that this is a promotional message. People stop taking, even having a look at that. So spam hence becomes a common resource. Why? Because you could not exclude the firms from not sending you an email, but the more promotional emails you receive, it clutters your inbox and then it becomes less effective and it becomes a spam resource. So like most common resources, spam is overused, which is why we get so much of it. Okay. Now just a small recap. I think we can have a look at it. It's quite simple to understand. Small quiz which I put for you learners, just to recap, just to rejuvenate you from whatever we have done. This is a small question I am going to pose you, give you certain options. You have to pick up the right option. So the question is, which of the following is not an example of common property resources? I'm giving you a few options. You have to pick up which is not a common property resource. Fisheries in international waters, public grazing lands, privately owned shopping malls, air and water qualities. Out of these four, which is not a common property resource? Fisheries in international water, public grazing lands, privately owned shopping malls, air and water quality. So the answer is privately owned malls. Why? Because you can exclude people from not using it. What is the tragedy of commons, which we have just discussed? It is a theory describing the depletion of common property resource due to individual self-interest. It is a comedy play by William Shakespeare. It is a type of economic model used in capitalism. It is a concept related to environmental sustainability. What is tragedy of commons? Answer would be, it is a theory which says that depletion of common property resources takes place because everybody thinks about their own individual self-interest. So, I hope you have understood this concept. We'll just do a quick revision. We have said that common resources are rival in consumption but not excludable. Examples we have seen are many of them: common grazing land, clean air, congested roads. Then people tend to use more of them because they don't have to pay for it, hence leading to what we call as tragedy of commons. I hope you have enjoyed this lecture and thank you, learners.